I have done it! I've gone rival in solo shuffle, not on one character, not on two characters, but four, twice. I've learned a lot, but there's a lot I still need to learn, and to help me learn, I thought I'd help you, dear audience, get your own 1800 Elite PvP sets from solo shuffle. Because they say the best way to learn is to teach, and making this video certainly revealed all the holes in my skill set. So in this episode of The Quest to Get Good, I go over all the things you need to know in order to get on my level, which isn't very high all things considered, but it was enough to get me to rival. And you are probably wondering why you should watch a guide made by some noob, and not one of the many multi-glads who could run circles around me in the arena with their eyes closed. Well, you see, I've watched a lot of those videos, and the conclusion I've come to was that the world needs more noob-to-noob communication. Sometimes, gladiators be like, just do X, Y, and Z, 2400, easy clap. And his noobs are like, but what about the A, B, and C's? And that's what this video is about, the A, B, and C's. It is primarily aimed at those starting from the very bottom with little to no experience. A guide for noobs made by noobs. Or a noob. That being said, this guide is made to be as evergreen as possible, which means I'm not going to be going into specific details about classes or metas, so you should really be looking up guides from other people for current season information. Phase 0. Preparation. So you've decided you want to learn to PvP. Ask yourself, which class? First thing you should do is look at the current meta tier lists, preferably multiple lists, because they are put together by different people who all have their own experiences and opinions. And specifically, tier lists for solo shuffle, and not for 3 vs 3 or RPGs, as they are going to look different. Another thing you should consider is where on the ladder these tier lists are aimed at. The meta at 2400 is going to look very different than 1800. From this, you basically want to figure out which classes are top, middle, and bottom tier. Now, you may be drawn to the top of the list for your choice, or as the player base has called it, the bottom. But let me stop you right there. Sometimes, top tier specs can have a really high skill ceiling and require a lot of experience to play them at their full capacity. So my suggestion is to either start with a simple class to play, even if it's mid-tier. This is why I started with Fury Warrior, nice easy 2-button rotation, or play a class you already have a lot of experience with, even if it isn't PvP experience, as long as it isn't bottom tier. Usually, if a class is bottom tier, there is a fundamental issue that is wrong with them that even the most skilled players have trouble overcoming. Right, so once you've picked your class and gotten them to max level, here comes the next step, setting up your talents, keybinds, and gearing. Unless you have a lot of experience with your class and its various builds, I just recommend looking up a guide, or going to a website like Murloc.io and looking up what the best players use. You may find that your PvP build plays much differently than your PvE build, so it's important to practice. Keybinds. Do not keyboard turn. Unbind your turn keys and bind strafe to them instead. Turn with your mouse, as it is much faster. You can then use the freed up strafe buttons for abilities. Now, what keys you bind to your abilities will vary a lot from person to person. You generally want the most used and most important abilities to be within easy reach. You don't want to be doing hand contortions while reaching for your trinket. If you run out of easy to reach keybinds, don't forget modifiers like Alt, Shift, and Control are an option. If you have extra money lying around or are already in possession of one, use a gaming mouse with all the extra buttons on the side. Just be aware that if the side buttons are linked to the numpad, then you can't use Shift with them because it will toggle the numpad functionality. If you plan on playing multiple characters, then try to keep similar abilities on similar keybinds. For example, I tend to have interrupts set to R on all my characters that have interrupts. Likewise, defensives tend to be set to Q or Shift Q. Don't be afraid to constantly iterate on your keybinds, even if it takes a while to get used to. While I was climbing the ladder, I shifted around my buttons a lot until I got a setup that I found worked the best. As for gearing, you'll want a full set of PvP gear with tier set if it's available and viable for PvP. Look up guides as to what your stat priority is for your spec, and try to get gear pieces with those particular stats. Best way to get PvP gear as someone with no PvP gear is Epic Battlegrounds, since you make up a much smaller fraction of your team so you drag them down less, as well as most Epic BGs tending to have vehicles or PvE activities that you can do to help your team out until you get enough gear to not fall over the instant you enter actual PvP combat. Don't forget to check the weekly quest to see if the one that gives you bonus, honor, or conquest is up. Another source of PvP gear, or at least here in Dragonflight, is open world content. If you turn on war mode, you can do PvP world quests that can reward gear or tokens to buy missing pieces with. You will want to consider the order in which you acquire your PvP gear. This doesn't matter so much for honor gear, but conquest gear tends to be very limited at the start of the season and requires you to actually win at PvP in order to get conquest points, so knowing which pieces of gear to get first is more important. There are two main strategies I've heard discussed in getting your conquest gear. The first is to save big for your big cost items and get them before anything else. The second is to get the low cost gear first and pray for the high cost stuff in the vault. Hello, editing me here. I took so long to edit this video that BlizzCon happened, where it was announced that as of 11.0, there will no longer be PvP gear in the vault, and instead they're just going to give us more conquest points per week. So if you're watching this in 11.0 or beyond, please disregard any advice involving the vault. Personally, I'm a fan of number 2, but number 1 might be the way to go if you're a melee spec that heavily relies on a good weapon. Another thing to consider is when in the season you are trying to gear. Starting at the beginning, your conquest cap is low, so you won't even be able to buy your weapon at first, but you will have more opportunities to get items out of the vault. On the other hand, if you start PvPing later in the season, the conquest cap will be a lot higher, and you'll be able to quickly accumulate the conquest you need for your big cost items, while having less opportunity in the vault. In the end, weigh the pros and cons and make a decision that works for you. Now, you may be tempted to hop into arena skirmishes to practice while you farm honor for gear, because it's a much similar format to Solo Shuffle, but unrated. I don't actually recommend it that much. The problem with skirmishes is A, if you are a DPS spec, you often find yourself in a 2 vs 2 match with no healer, which plays very differently than a 3 vs 3 with a healer, and is often over before you can blink. And B, half the time you get matched with or against Glad level players doing warm-up rounds, and trust me, you aren't getting any useful experience out of that. Once you have a full set of gear, enchants and gems optional but recommended, and have gotten a bit of practice, it is time for the next part of your preparation phase. Mental preparation. PvP can be daunting. It isn't like PvE where your enemy acts in a predictable pattern every single time you fight them. Because of this, it's easy to get overwhelmed and lose confidence in yourself, as you may feel your goal is out of reach. However, there is a rather clever mental trick you can play on yourself to help mitigate most of the stress and allow you to play it better. Change your goal. Instead of making your goal, I want to get to 1800 to get that cool elite PvP set, make it, I want to be better, I want to get good. By changing your goal to the quest for self-improvement, you can now approach the outcome of a game differently. Where before a loss felt like a setback, a loss now can be seen as a learning experience, merely another step you take to get you to the top of the mountain. However, in order to utilize this mindset properly, you need to accept one important thing, that you suck, and not everything is your teammates' fault. In fact, because of how Solo Shuffle works, if you are constantly losing, it's almost certainly your fault. Remember, 1800 comes with winning comes with being good, and being good comes with getting good. Work at getting good, and victory will be yours. In addition to getting into the mindset of getting good, other things to prepare yourself for mentally are rating anxiety, toxicity, and tilting. When you get close to a threshold rating, you may find yourself assaulted by certain intrusive thoughts. Despite what I said previously about making your goal getting good, self-gaslighting can only go so far. Your subconscious knows what your true goal is. As soon as it catches a whiff of it, no matter how hard you try, it will claw desperately at the back of your mind, breaking your focus and dragging you down. It is very frustrating. There are different methods for dealing with rating anxiety. If you are only into one particular class and don't mind having ults, I have heard that climbing on 2 characters of the same class and spec can be helpful. Simply play whichever one has the lowest rating, and when you surpass your other tune, swap and play that one. This way, even if you do have a bad losing streak and lose a ton of rating, you won't feel as bad since you always have that other tune acting as your checkpoint. If you don't want to use this method, the other option is simply to try and ignore the intrusive thoughts. One way of doing this is by reminding yourself that this is a video game, that you are playing for fun and not to worry about rating. Another option is to simply not look at the rating at all and let the achievement toast take you by surprise. However, if neither of these techniques work for you, especially the don't look at the rating one, since it's rather hard to avoid seeing it, there is one final technique that may work. Meditation. Yes, the thing where you sit still for a period of time and go hum. This may seem kind of like a nonsense method, but hear me out. The point of meditation is to allow thoughts to flow freely out of your mind without letting them get stuck. By meditating, you are practicing taking intrusive thoughts and pushing them aside. Sort of like doing reps at the gym, but for your mind. So when you're in the arena, one good match away from 1800, and that gnawing voice at the back of your mind starts telling you that you will fail, you can simply give it a gentle push and let it float away while you get back to focusing on the match. Now, another mental hurdle you may face during your climb is toxicity from other players. Sometimes, people are angry and they feel like taking this out on you, whether you actually deserved it or not. And getting berated by random strangers on the internet can feel bad, even if you know they are wrong. And feeling bad can make you enjoy the game less, and that can result in worse gameplay and the desire to quit. However, there are several easy ways to deal with it. One is to just turn off chat entirely and ignore your team chat and any whispers you receive. This has the downside of making it harder to coordinate a strategy, as well as receive constructive criticism by the few players who actually like to help people. But it might be worth it, especially if you're playing a healer, who often get the brunt of the negativity. Another method is to remember that everyone who is currently playing signed something called the social contract, which, whether they read it or not, made them agree to not being a dick. If they are being a dick, report them. Let Blizzard deal with their nonsense. Now lastly, I want to talk about a concept called tilting. Tilting could best be summed up as your emotions, often negative, getting the better of you and making you play worse. Both rating anxiety and toxicity from other players can lead to tilting, but it can also come from within, or even without. Sometimes, people just have a bad day at work or school, and it can affect them for the rest of the day. Mental preparation techniques that I've mentioned, like meditation, help a lot, but sometimes the best treatment is to simply take a break. Have a nap, play a different game, go outside and enjoy nature, touch some grass, even consider just going to bed early and getting a good night's sleep. In fact, I want to expand on that last point a bit. Don't binge play PvP. Like studying for school, it's often best to spread out your studying over the course of many days and not to cram the night before a major test. The brain needs time to internalize lessons and create new synapses, and this is often done while you are asleep. There have been many times in my life where I've struggled with something, whether it be something in real life or in game, and have then decided to sleep on it and leave it for a day or two. And when I finally get back to it, like magic, it's suddenly a lot easier. The brain is an amazingly adaptive organ, but it requires time and rest. Oh, actually, one final thing. There will very likely come a time where you have a massive loss streak and lose like 300 rating in one night. This is normal. It happens to everyone. Don't sweat it. Sometimes you just get unlucky. You gained the rating before and you can do it again. Now it's time to queue. Your first match is what is called your placement match. It determines your starting MMR. What is MMR? I suppose I should explain that. There are two types of rating that are important. One is your CR, or current rating, which is the rating that actually gets you the rewards. The other is MMR, or matchmaking rating, which is used to place you against foes of similar skill level. CR follows MMR. If your MMR is higher than your CR will rise to match it. If your MMR is lower than your CR will fall. MMR rises and falls based on how much you win or lose. In certain situations, if you, for example, have a bad losing streak and your MMR drops by a lot, and then you have a good win, you may find that you don't actually gain any rating. This is because your MMR is so far below your CR that your win couldn't make up the difference. You can resolve this by winning more until your MMR goes back up. Likewise, if you're on a huge winning streak and have a bad loss, you may find you don't lose any rating because your MMR is so much higher than your CR. It works both ways. Basically, all you need to know is that winning makes rating go up and losing makes rating go down. MMR is very good at placing you where you should be, and if you reach a point where your win rate is 50-50, you won't be able to move anywhere until you improve. Right, so your placement game. This game is very important in determining your initial MMR. If you go 6-0 or 5-1, you will be placed up in the 1900 MMR bracket, which, if you are an experienced PvPer, is great. Keep winning and your CR will fly up in no time. However, if you're not an experienced PvPer, I highly recommend that you do bad on purpose in this initial game. Otherwise, you'll be spending the next few hours hopelessly outmatched as you tank your MMR to a somewhat more reasonable level. Now that your initial placement is set, it's time to overcome your next obstacle, the queue. The best way to get fast queues is to roll a healer. If you aren't playing a healer, then I suggest you find something to do in the meantime. This could be in-game stuff like world quests, rare hunting, and profession activities, or stuff outside the game, like those chores you know you've been putting off. If you have money to spare, investing in some wireless headphones can be very handy, so you're able to hear when the queue pops even if you aren't at your screen. One of the reasons I actually recommend a mid-tier class over an S-tier class is because Solo Shuffle tries not to put the same specs together in a match, meaning more played classes tend to have longer queue times. Right, so let's get to the actual PvP phases. Keep in mind that you shouldn't be expected to go through all the phases in one day. The process of getting good takes time, and everyone learns at a slightly different rate. Do not feel bad if you're a bit slow on the uptake. You'll get there eventually. Phase 1, Deer in the Headlights. So you queue for Solo Shuffle and enter the arena. The gates open and you rush out to meet your enemies, and you just kind of freeze. There is so much going on. Spells flying everywhere, people running all over the place. Maybe your first match has both a demo lock and an Unholy Death Knight, and your screen is filled with nameplates. You try to attack someone only to find yourself CC'd, and when you aren't CC'd, you can't seem to output any good damage or healing. The enemy attacks you and you just fall over. Before you can even begin to wrap your head around what's happening, the match is over. In the following matches, you don't fare much better. One of the main differences between PvE and PvP, and one of the main reasons that people have a tough time getting into PvP, is the sheer informational mental computation seemingly required to do well at all. To help simplify and reduce the burn, we are going to do two things. First is to fix our UI. There are several add-ons that are commonly used to help express useful information as well as simplify things. The main add-on people use for arenas is Gladius X, which gives you special arena frames with PvP-specific information on it, like if your enemy has used a trinket or not, and diminishing return trackers, among other things. Other add-ons include big debuffs, which shows things like CC being used on someone, Omnibar, which shows enemy cooldowns, Omni-CD, which can be used to track party cooldowns, weak auras, which can be used for a whole bunch of different things. For example, May's weak aura package is useful for indicating when a teammate is using a cooldown. There's also Gladiator Losa, which uses a text-to-speech voice to tell you when an enemy is using a certain spell. There's also things you can do with the base UI, such as turning off the nameplates of enemy pets and minions. You can even use the combo of the base UI and modded UI. For example, some people use an add-on like Plater for enemy nameplates, but keep the default nameplates for their own team so that they can easily differentiate them at a glance. Now, really important, especially if you're going to use something like Gladiator Losa, is to go into the settings and adjust things to show only the abilities that matter. Otherwise, there will be way too much information being thrown your way. Your brain will be overloaded and the add-ons will be next to useless. For example, I suggest creating a new profile for your class or character, making sure every ability in all tabs is turned off, and then go through it, turning on 1 or 2 abilities per class that you want to keep track of. What you do keep track of is going to be different depending on what you're playing, but you generally just want to turn on big damage cooldowns, trinkets, and certain CC abilities. I suggest turning on major defensives, but only if it's a defensive that can affect your output. For example, casters probably aren't going to care about evasion, and melee physical attackers aren't going to care about something like anti-magic shell or spell reflect. I also don't recommend turning on easily noticeable abilities like Kyrian Spear, Ring of Frost, Priest Barrier, or Bladestorm, because you can just use your eyes for those. Do this for all add-ons that give you the option to do so. Make sure you type /reload or relog after you are done to save your changes. Once your UI has been fixed up somewhat, the second thing is to download some sort of recording software like OBS and record your games so that you can rewatch them and take note of your mistakes, as well as try to see what your teammates and enemy were doing while you were tunnel visioning. Now, chances are you'll see a lot that you've done wrong, or even a lot of things that you aren't sure are wrong, and it may be a bit overwhelming knowing where to start. But that's okay, we are only in phase 1 after all. Just write down what obvious mistakes you notice, and try to work at getting better at those. Over time, you'll be able to better spot a mistake in the moment and react accordingly, as well as to make less mistakes in general. Thirdly, is learning the main thing you need to learn. That is more important than anything else. It's your throughput, or in other words, your basic rotation. Well, actually, your basic rotation can be split into several subcategories of rotation. First off is, well, your base rotation. This is your rotation without any cooldowns present on a basic target dummy that doesn't fight back. You will want to practice this rotation until you can do it without even thinking. Second of all is your burst rotation. This is the sequence of key presses that gives you maximum throughput and will eventually lead into your basic rotation once your cooldowns run out. You also want to be able to do this without thinking, so I suggest practicing it a lot either against a training dummy or while doing open world content. Third type of rotation is a bit more class dependent and likely won't differ from either of the previous if you are a melee class, but you also need to learn how to maximize throughput while being attacked by another player. This is a bit trickier to practice since target dummies and NPCs tend not to interrupt or stun in an unpredictable manner. This type of rotation may take a lot longer to master and require a bunch of PvP experience. So at the very least, try and master the first two, since you likely won't be getting trained all the time, and you want to take advantage of these moments. It's this part that really makes me suggest a simple class, even if it's mid-tier, to start out with rather than a complex meta class, because it's hard to keep your throughput up and learn all the additional stuff you need to know to climb if your rotation is complex or easily interruptible. So if your UI set up, screen recorder rolling, and your basic rotation mastered, it's time to move on to Phase 2. Phase 2, chicken with its head cut off. So you queue for solo shuffle and enter the arena. The gates open and you rush out to meet your enemies, and before you know it, you're already dead. Before you go blaming your healer for not keeping you alive, stop and consider. You may have mastered your damage output, but so have your enemies. Did you do anything to help stop their output? Did you press a defensive? This is where video recordings come in handy. The fight itself may be a blur in your memory, but recordings don't misremember. You can use them to check how well you played, and more importantly, if you didn't press any buttons you should have pressed. Make a commitment to yourself. If I am to die, then make sure all my defensives are on cooldown beforehand. Get in the habit of knowing where your defensives are and pressing them. Don't worry about using them optimally right now. We'll get to that in Phase 3. What's important is that you are pressing them. Remember to adjust your keybinds if you find pressing them to be unintuitive and clunky. In addition to not pressing your defensives, another thing that tends to give DPS a quick dirt nap right out of the gate is lining your healer. Do not break line of sight with your healer. If your healer cannot see you, they cannot heal you. Looking at you, warriors, you damn brainless fools who just love leaping across the map, running around the pillar, only to then blame the healer when you mysteriously go 1-5 or 0-6. Also, healers. I've seen you line your DPS too on occasion. Don't do that. Lastly, if all other resources are used up and your healer is unavailable due to distance, line of sight, or CC, there's always the option of trying to CC those attacking you, and/or making a quick retreat back to safety. Solo shuffle matches tend to be over quickly, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to use stall tactics on occasion if you just need a bit more time for a cooldown to come back up or for your healer to escape CC. Phase 3, cat chasing a laser pointer. So you queue for solo shuffle and enter the arena. The gates open and you rush out to meet your enemies. You have become a machine of death. You are top damage every round. You die much more rarely than you used to. And yet, victory always seems to be slightly out of reach. No matter how hard you try, you can't quite seem to capture it. Here's where things start to get a bit more complicated. The learning curve just got a bit steeper. First of all, remember how I told you to press your defensives willy-nilly in order to get used to pressing them? Well, it's time to stop that and learn how to use them properly. This is where add-ons come in handy, specifically add-ons that tell you when your enemy has popped a cooldown, because when your enemy has popped their offensive cooldown is when you want to pop your defensive one in return. More specifically, when they are actually targeting you. If they are targeting your teammate, then don't waste your cooldown. And more importantly, you need to pop it early and not when you're almost already dead. Like 80% to 90%, not execute range. Heck, assuming you don't have a teammate nearby for them to easily switch to, pop your defensive as soon as they pop theirs, even if you're at 100%. Likewise, at this stage, it's important to pay attention to your opponent's defensives. If your opponent just popped their defensives and you still have your offensive cooldowns up, it's usually best to save them until their defensives wear out. Alternatively, you could just swap targets to someone else. This is also a good option if your opponent does pop their defensives right after you pop your offensive abilities, but only do this if another target is within easy reach or the defensives is the full immunity like Ice Block or Divine Shield and you have no way of breaking it. Sometimes you can bait your enemy into using defensives early by using a shorter DPS cooldown for a small burst and then saving your big burst for when they have nothing left. Aside from offensive and defensive trading with the enemy, it's also useful to keep track of your teammates' cooldowns. 2 DPS synchronizing their bursts can be absolutely devastating. Not only that, but healers often have defensive cooldowns they can use on their teammates, like Ironbark or Pain Suppression. If you notice that you have one of these abilities on you, it's often best to save your defensives for later. However, since Soul Shuffle is chaos and it's hard to easily communicate with your healer on cooldown usage, it's often a better idea to just not trust them and use your own defensive. You should also be working on proper utility use. Now hopefully up until now, you haven't been ignoring your utility and CC abilities. If you have, then it's time to start using them, especially shorter 30-second cooldowns like Stormbolt or Traps. Ideally, you use them to help set up a kill or at least force your enemy to use a bunch of defensive cooldowns so you can set up a kill in the future. A lot of defensives can't be used while stunned, so using a stun on a kill target and then popping your big DPS cooldowns is a good way to get a lot of damage through and force the healer to use some of their major cooldowns. CC can also be good at stopping an enemy's burst and wasting their DPS cooldowns, potentially saving you or your healer from having to use a defensive. Now, you don't always want to use CC on DPS. Where CC can be most effective is on a healer during kill opportunities. If you have multiple types of CC, it's important to learn how to chain CC. For example, when I was playing my priest, I used a combo of Silence, Psychic Horror, and Psychic Scream in order to keep the healer out of the game for something like 10 to 12 seconds, assuming they didn't have a trinket. Likewise, on my hunter, I would use a combo of Scattershot, Freezing Trap, and occasionally Intimidate in order to keep the healer out of the fight long enough to get a kill, or at least apply heavy pressure. And here's where I was originally going to go into detail on how diminishing returns, or DR, works, but then I realized it got to 1804 characters while barely paying attention to it, so I'm saving it for the next phase. Now before we move on to said next phase, I want to talk about two more aspects that will give you a decent boost: macros and targeting. Macros are handy at several things, such as reducing button bloat by macroing abilities together, and targeting. Macro targeting can come in a few different forms. One is having a macro like /target arena 1, 2, or 3 that you can keybind to individual keys so you can instantly target an enemy player without having to click on them or rely on tab targeting. Or even to target your own party members, like of /target party 1 or 2 and /target player for yourself. If you do use macros that target your own party members, I suggest using an add-on like frame sort to make sure you're always in the same spot if you base your button presses on frame locations. Another type of targeting macro is the focus macro. Now if you don't know what a focus is, basically target something and type /focus, and their health bar will appear somewhere on your screen. You can then target other people or things and the focus will stay there as long as you don't outrange it or it doesn't vanish via stealth or invisibility. This allows you to keep an eye on it, swap quickly to it when necessary, or even better, create a macro that allows you to throw CC its way without having to change your target. I believe more advanced PvPers actually have keybinds that allow them to quickly swap their focus target, but for now, I suggest just making a keybind that focuses your current target and setting it to the healer all game. Keep in mind that certain abilities, like Shadow Meld, will break your focus and you'll need to reapply it. Now when I said targeting earlier, I didn't just mean to actually target the person, I also meant to target the right person. It is important to be on the same page as your teammates as to not split DPS. Attacking the same target is almost always the better option, as healers can only do so much throughput and will often be forced to cycle through cooldowns if one of their teammates is being hard focused. There are certain exceptions, like if you can't currently reach the kill target, it can be better to swap to someone else to keep the damage up and split the healer's focus, but this should only be temporary. Usually people will communicate before the gates open on who to go for, but sometimes they don't, and sometimes the kill target will switch at some point in the match. It is hard to describe when to know when the kill target has switched, as communication post-gates opening is almost next to impossible, but after you play enough games, it kind of starts to become instinctual, like a shark smelling blood in the water. Things to watch out for is if there's a lot of cleave going on and several enemy team members have low health, and the original kill target just got a bunch of defensives used on them, or if someone gets separated from the group, or if the original kill target is a bit too slippery. Sometimes the right move is to suddenly swap to the healer right after they pressed a bunch of big buttons to keep their teammate alive. Other times, you just gotta keep an eye on your teammate and see what they are attacking and follow them. Like I said, it's one of those things you pick up through experience. However, a lot of the time you won't be swapping targets, and instead you'll be sticking to the same target all game. Deciding who the initial target is going to be often comes down to two things. Number 1, who is the squishiest or burns through their defensives the fastest, and number 2, who is the most dangerous and needs to be focused and shut down. That being said, in solo shuffle, the person who often gets focused all game is the first one who dies in the first round. Make sure this isn't you. If you're playing a more squishy or higher priority kill class, then you really need to do your best to stay alive in the first game. Damage and winning be damned. You need to send a message that you aren't an easy target so people focus you less on subsequent games. Right, last phase. Phase 4, Observant Owl. So you queue for solo shuffle and enter the arena. The gates open and you rush out to meet your enemies. Not only are you a machine of death, but your wise use of defensives have made you feel unstoppable to the enemy. Your target is half health, and you use your focus macro to lock down the healer, either getting a kill or forcing the healer to use their trinket and a big healing cooldown. The fight might go on for a bit longer, but you are winning. Your rating is rising, but not quite enough to get you over the threshold. Assuming you have practiced and trained all the skills that I've told you in the previous phases, you will very likely be within reach of 1800. This last phase is more or less cleaning up loose ends and giving you that last little nudge you might need. It's about being aware of the state of the game, where everyone is, what cooldowns are available to your enemy, and when your own team uses their cooldowns. Also DR. This is the stage where you really want to start paying attention to positioning. If you were wondering why I didn't talk about such an important tool earlier, it's because it's 90% not lining your own healer. However, if you get to the higher ratings, it becomes much more important to think about. Ideally, you will be fighting well away from your own healer, but close enough that your healer isn't forced to chase you into a bad position themselves. You also will likely want to drag the fight onto the enemy healer in order to disrupt them as much as possible. Other positioning strategies include pillar humping, which is useful against casters, the triangle method, where 3 casters all stand in a triangle, forcing melee to pick a target, allowing for the other 2 casters to free cast, or standing in a tight space around a corner, forcing the enemy to come to you so you can cleave them easier, assuming you have a melee cleave comp. Another thing you should be working on, and hopefully have been as you've played more and more games, is class knowledge. Since I want this video to be as evergreen as possible, I'm not going into detail on how each class works, but generally you want to know, aside from DPS and defensive cooldowns, things like what kind of utility each class has and how often they can pop their burst or use their defensives and how long they last, as well as what kind of tricks or strategies can be used to reduce their output. For example, the best spell to interrupt, or which melee classes are most affected by roots and snares. Playing alts is a great way to learn what makes a class tick, and what kind of counters work against them. Oh yeah, I guess I should talk about DR, or diminishing returns. Once upon a time, in ages past, it was possible for a mage to keep you sheeped for as long as they saw fit, and rogues to chain stun you from full HP to 0, even if you majorly outgeared them. But Blizz, in their average wisdom, saw this, and saw that the people were miserable, and so they introduced diminishing returns. So now, when you go to CC someone, you'll notice that they only stay CC'd for a much shorter amount of time compared to a mob. Not only that, if you were to use the same CC on them right away, the duration would be halved, and if used again, it will be quartered, and if used a 4th time, they'll be immune. This is DR. Whenever you use a CC on someone, it starts a 15-second timer, which is refreshed whenever you use the same type of CC on them, unless they are in the final immune phase. Once those 15 seconds are up, you'll be able to get the full duration of CC on them again. Now you may have noticed I used the term same type of CC. This is because different CCs can actually trigger diminishing returns in each other if they belong to the same type. For example, Bash will trigger the same DR as Stormbolt, since they are both stuns, but Fear is a different type of CC, so will have the full duration even if it's used right after the stun. Generally, similar CCs belong to the same category, but you sometimes get seemingly unrelated types of CCs belonging to the same DR group for balance reasons, such as Scattershot and Freezing Trap, because let's face it, Hunters being able to CC you for like 14 seconds straight would be ridiculous. In more structured PvP like 3 vs 3, where you purposefully group of people, make plans before getting into games, and talk over comms, it is possible to rotate and time your CCs for maximum disruption against the enemy team. In Solo Shuffle, that is much harder to do because everything is chaos. You will often find multiple people trying to CC the same target at once, either wasting their cooldowns or causing unnecessary DR. There are also a lot of cases where you may go to CC a target, not realizing they already have DR on them from someone else's CC. That being said, while it's usually optimal to throw CCs at people with 0 DR on them, occasionally there are situations where it's absolutely fine to chain the same type of CCs one after another, even if they do share the same DR. For example, despite what some people might say, it is absolutely fine to use Scattershot and Freezing Trap right as it's about to fade. You don't always need a maximum CC duration. A lot of the times even just a few seconds are enough to get a kill. Aside from DR, certain CCs can also actually impede your teammates, such as Polymorph, which removes all dots on the target, neutering the damage of classes that rely on them, and Cyclone, which makes the target immune to everything, and can be very annoying when I pop all my offensive cooldowns only to find my damage eaten by some swirly air. Please, if you have CC that can potentially disrupt your own teammates, don't just spam it every chance you get. Save it for the healer when you're actually trying to land a kill. And yeah, that's all the information I have to share. Hopefully it's helpful. Yeah, so this video took longer to get out than I thought it would. I had originally planned to have it done before the release of Dragonflight Season 3. I could make excuses, but really it's my own fault for procrastinating so much. I had planned everything out and then got intimidated by the amount of work I had to do. But when I actually sat down and forced myself to work on it, it didn't turn out so bad. I guess that's the main lesson to be learned here. A mountain may seem tall and insurmountable, but once you actually start climbing, you'll find yourself at the top in no time, and then wonder why you didn't start sooner. I do think it would have helped if I had picked a smaller mountain first, though. I am still new to making videos and not very efficient at editing. Because of this, I probably won't have so many drawings or little animations in future videos. Plans for the future are to continue my quest to get good. I'd like to get to 1800 on the same 4 tunes again, but this time much earlier in the season when the ratings aren't as inflated so much. This would give me more time towards the end of the season to play new classes and learn different roles. In particular, I'd like to learn to heal in PvP, which I hear can be a bit of a nightmare in solo shuffle, but I did pug Heroic Sepulchre back in 9.2, so I'm no stranger to bashing my head against a wall for hours on end. Until I actually start learning to heal, I don't think I'll be making any more PvP videos. I also don't want this channel to be a purely PvP channel. I want to cover a bunch of other WoW related topics as well. I may even branch out into non-WoW related stuff eventually, but I don't have any concrete plans. As time consuming as it is, I found that making videos is fun. I just need to learn how to get more efficient at it, as well as learning how to better use my time in general, so I can actually do all the things I want to do, and not be in a panic rush by the end of the season. If you've liked what you've seen, please consider a like and subscribe. Also comment below if you have any PvP advice you'd like to share with all the newbies out there, including me, or even to share some of your experiences on your own personal quest to get good. I also have a variety of social media scattered across the internet that I solely use to post art on, so if you like my art, you can follow me there. I even do commissions if you're interested in having your character drawn. Thanks for watching, and remember to always strive to be better.